I see that we have a quorum already in the Zoom, so out of respect for everyone's time, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining. I had text from a few people who are either physically unwell or on vacation right now. I know it's a time of year that people are all over the place, so thank you very much for joining, and thanks for your involvement in this work. Since we have a quorum present, the Tuesday, July 20th meeting of the Reimagining Public Safety Committee is now being called to order. And I want to begin with public comment. So is there anybody not a member of the committee, who would, a member of the public, that's to say, who would like to make a comment? All right, seeing none. Obviously, at any time, folks can send commentary in writing, and I think that is always most appreciated. The next item is approval of the July 6th, 2021 minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Great. So Sean Peck Collier moves to approve the minutes. Sarah Bogan seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
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 That was amazing. Any opposed? All right, seeing none, the motion carries, and just another thing that Zoom was not built for, apparently. But in any case, the July 6th minutes are approved. Okay, so we have a few different items to discuss. It's actually kind of a longer agenda in terms of number of items on it than we've had, but I think it actually might be a shorter meeting. Famous last words, we'll see. But the first thing I wanted to do is, item 4 on the agenda is listed as outlining the values and principles of this committee. And obviously we've been talking around and about this topic throughout our time together, but I especially wanted to flag that in one of the 3 working groups, the working group on the kind of organizational structure of the police department itself, there was the view expressed that it would be useful for their efforts to have a kind of an organizing document, nothing fancy, nothing complex, nothing sophisticated, but an organizing document that at least enumerates some shared values and principles. And so there was some talk in that committee meeting about that committee taking that project on themselves, and there was, I think, some hesitation about wait, now who are we really to speak for the whole group? And what eventually got decided was that just a very, very brief, and you can see in the email that I sent the other evening, a very, very brief list of essentially bullets was produced as kind of a starting point, with the idea that that would be brought to this committee. We could have a brief discussion, partially about what's missing, partially about how to flesh out the very, as I said, brief bullets that are there, and then coming out of that, assign us one or a small group of people to write a draft that we could then see before our next meeting, and then have some discussion at our next meeting. So with that, I don't know if folks have the email in front of them. I will just quickly put in there's no chat, right? So I won't do that. So I guess I'll read it out loud for those of you who don't have it in front of you. There's simply 4 items on the list. One is about the historical relationship between policing and race in America. One is about the imperative of viewing violence as a public health crisis. One is about building a public safety system that centers the needs of survivors and those most affected by violence. And one is about the need for investment in non-police state capacity to solve public safety problems. So I wanted to just kind of open the floor for discussion about what's missing, and what more needs to be said as well those items. Does anyone want to add anything? Sean.
I would like to add to this list proactive transparency and accountability initiatives.
Okay. I'm writing as you speak, just so I have them as soon as we're done. So Sean adds proactive transparency and accountability. Do you want to say a little bit more? I mean, those are, on the one hand, relatively specific words. On the other hand, they've become kind of political slogans, and everything that ever happens in the public sector in America is definitely both transparent and accountable, according to somebody. So if you could say a word about what you're getting at here, I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it is important, and I worry that what I say may still be construed as sort of vague or very applicable to many things. But I think whenever possible, in general, but especially when it comes to public safety, that there should be proactive disclosure of as much data and memos and surveys and so on and so forth as possible. I think that's necessary not just to make sure that the residents know what is going on as it is happening, but also promotes accountability through sometimes revealing information that may not sound or look pretty, but is honest about how things are going on. So, for example, if, say, to be hyper specific, a study of traffic stops happens to reveal a disparity of in terms of which folks are being stopped more than others, being transparent about that, as well as saying, and these are the next steps that we are taking in order to address this issue, I think would both engender public trust in whatever public safety system we choose to settle on or move to, but also allow for a culture of focusing on the mission, and hopefully that mission will be the public safety definition that this committee and maybe hopefully with the input of our residents come to an agreement on. Not sure if that is any more specific than what I started with, but
I think so. And anyway, I think that was helpful. So thank you. Are there others who want to add anything to the list?
Not to add to the list, but to add to what Sean had said, and with accountability and transparent, with in public safety, things happen in the city and we hear about it and that's it. We don't get the full detail or the full information of what happened in the city. And then you get these reports and things that are put out, and they kind of designate your city in terms of, oh, this is the hot spot, this is where most of the shooting happen, or this is where certain things happen. And people are looking and asking, well, I don't remember that happening. So there's not transparent in the information coming out. There's nowhere that they can go, which should be the dashboard that the police have, that they can look up there and see, oh, here's this information. And yes, I can talk to my neighbor and they can come to a conclusion from looking at the information that this did happen these days, but not this many days, and can come to the police department or the city to say, well, there is misinformation and you're characterizing my neighborhood wrong. But we don't have that. We don't have that transparent enough for people to know what is going on in their neighborhood. So I'm hoping that when we finish this and this come out, not only will this give you information as to what is the amount of money that we should be putting into the budget and stuff, but it will clear up and give directions to the different departments and officers as to what they should be giving to the public. So, you know, determine the amount of money that is being spent is one thing, but the other thing is, are we telling the people, giving them enough information that says, we spent $10 here, and that was because of this. And if I cannot see any evidence that will correlate with the spending of that money, then why did you spend it? Why are we putting that in the budget? Are we creating a budget of slush funds for whatever? So it definitely has to have that accountability and transparency. Otherwise, there's no public safety happening because you're keeping people in the dark.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Esther. Thank you. Kimberly.
Hi, thanks for recognizing me. I just wanted to add one thing, and just thinking about, transparency and how you hear about what's happening in the police department or, in terms of crime. And I would love a dashboard. I know one thing that I signed up for is this thing called In the Squad Room. And it's like a weekly column, if you will, written by a citizen who attends. And I will say, I just wonder, like, has the police department thought about, how do we select, which residents are allowed to sit in those deployment meetings, and sort of how do we ensure that the communication and the way that the stories are reported or the things are summarized, like, don't maybe have, some biases or to Miss Esther's point, like, sort of written from the perspective of people's opinion and perceptions of certain things or certain areas in the city. And I don't know, like, how this was started, or, if there's an application or, whoever who grants her permission to attend, but I just wonder, can we be more inclusive? Is that I think there are some people who may be signed up and that's like a passive way to hear what's happening, and they show like a weekly crime map, and they talk about a lot of things that are happening. But I do think that there is sometimes the possibility that the way that information is shared doesn't necessarily create inclusivity and sort of promote trust, because it's written from, you know, a certain perspective, right? So I don't, if someone like maybe the representatives here from the police department, like, I don't know how that program is sort of sponsored or sanctioned, but just something to think about, you know, are there opportunities along with dashboards and other things we hope to build, but for this sort of digest that's already going out every week, you know, are there opportunities to maybe be thoughtful about how we talk about crime that's happening in the city and where it has happened and who it has happened to, and also layering in maybe some of the structural reasons, right? Not just, hey, there was a robbery here, you know, but also talking about other things that we know this committee has started exploring as to reasons why violence tends to perpetuate sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. Deputy Chief Sacluti, do you have any reaction to describing how that all works?
Yes, thank you so much for your comments. It makes a lot of sense to me. I do understand that we have Linda Hansen, who's a resident here within Evanston, who has been attending our weekly deployment meetings that you're talking about. And she's been doing this for quite a few years now. So I can certainly understand how that's only coming from one perspective. We don't typically invite citizens to our deployment meetings. And the reason why that is because there's a lot of intelligence that is shared throughout those meetings that are very sensitive in nature. We have these meetings weekly, and in these weekly meetings that are called our deployment meetings, it's basically our entire command staff. And we talk about crime trends and patterns. And sometimes as we're investigating those things and looking at patterns, there's information that's developed throughout the week that can be very sensitive in nature that we don't necessarily want at that time to share with the public until there's more measures that are happening at the end of it. And two, also at these deployment meetings, there are times that there are crimes that are occurring or information that's being shared between different divisions. And a lot of that can sometimes include juveniles. And again, we have to be very careful with some of the information that's there. But I definitely, I appreciate your comments about how it's only coming from one perspective. I can certainly relate to that. And that is definitely something that I'm going to take to my chief and express some of your comments about that to her.
Thank you. Kimberly, do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, I just would say, you know, thanks. I'm not suggesting that, you know, I don't know who Linda Hansen is, or if anyone on this call does. Like, I'm not suggesting that I see anything necessarily wrong with her attending. I just wonder, like, when we set the parameters, I think it's great we have a program where we do allow some citizens to, you know, listen in, or one citizen is what it sounds like right now, but like, can we maybe look at having a couple of voices? And so maybe they collectively contribute to how the stories are told, right? I'm not saying that she shouldn't be the person to do it. I do appreciate her commentary and like having someone there that can help translate the information, right? But I just wonder if there is an opportunity to maybe broaden the voices that contribute to that. So maybe it's a couple of people, or maybe you even put out a way for people who are interested to sign up rather than sort of asking people, right? Because I think sometimes when we ask people, we may tend to ask the people that, you know, we know or that are in our networks, and that may not always lead to the best representation either. But I think it's, you know, great that you're willing to share that suggestion. So thanks. I think that's something that maybe could be a quick win, if you will, since it's already sort of a approved process that you all have at the police department.
I hear you. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything to add? If not, now for the really terrible part. Is there anyone who is willing to spend a little bit of time between now and the next meeting putting this in, you know, writing something down? So I don't think it needs to be long and complicated. We're talking about a couple of paragraphs, maybe a page, you know, perhaps 2 pages if you write the way I do, but certainly not not more than that. But the idea would be to produce, to turn this very, very brief outline into just a little bit of a narrative that could be discussed at our next meeting and then hopefully agreed upon as a kind of a basis for our work. Sarah.
Oh, I was just raising my hand as yes, I would be happy to help with that.
Great, thank you. Anybody else interested in joining a small but mighty team of writers? Okay.
I'm happy to help out with that.
Oh, thank you, Kristen. So I'll just start an email chain with myself and Sarah and Kristen. I'm definitely happy to help. I'm not. I think it would be unwise for me to assign this to myself. I'm not sure that I have the bandwidth to carry it, but I would love to be helpful and supportive and certainly give some time to it as well. So we will be working during the course of the next 2 weeks, and we'll have something ready to share with this group in advance of the next meeting. Beautiful. Thank you. That brings us to item 5 on our agenda, which is establishing a list of external resources. And this could perhaps be very, very quick. I just realized that, as I'm going through life, reaching out to people and getting input, I'm having useful conversations, and in some cases with organizations outside of the city of Evanston that have interest in supporting our work. And I thought that rather than just having those conversations on my own and feeling good about them, it would be good to initiate a brief discussion here just about what external resources we ought to be tapping into, what organizations or what individuals or what other sources of support we should be looking for to help with our work. And so I decided to kick it off with just a list of groups I've been in touch with. I've had really positive discussions with the ACLU, which not only their Illinois chapter, but also their national office is really interested in supporting municipalities that are trying to think differently about public safety. Thanks to an introduction from Andy Papachristos, we had a really positive initial discussion with the Center for Policing Equity. We've talked a lot about the Alliance for Safety and Justice, and Evangeline has talked about her work with them and the approach and framework that they bring. I've had useful discussions with the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And then finally, there are perhaps a small number, but still a number of municipalities across the country that are really grappling with these questions in a similar way to the sorts of discussions that our group has had so far. And, I've found discussions with some of the, some of my counterparts, the mayors in those communities or advocates or other elected officials to be helpful. And I think I've offered this to some folks, maybe in a previous meeting, to everyone, I'm not sure. Would certainly be happy to invite folks who've been a part of efforts like that to essentially present in one of our subsequent meetings about what they've learned and what pitfalls they uncovered during the course of their work. So that's a list of resources that I've been leaning on so far, and would be really interested to hear if others of you want to add to that list. Let's start with Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm on a bus now, green transportation, so I've been.
Is it an electric bus?
It is not an electric bus. CTA needs to step up its game, so that's not outside of our realm. But I have been separately meeting with some of the groups you named, ACLU, because I put in a referral to decriminalize drugs here in Evanston. Understanding that we need to approach that. And so as we're thinking about reallocating resources, I think one of the resources that we'll have to reallocate toward is the response. And so peer services, the meeting with peer services has been, maybe this is recorded, but it's been one of the most fruitful discussions I've had. And the executive director there is extremely knowledgeable. And I think bringing peer services in to this discussion would be helpful as we think about what we're going to have as an alternative response. Yeah, that's to me the most salient group to add to that list from my standpoint.
Great. Thank you. Do others want to add anyone to this list?
If I may, I think the Shriver Center on Poverty Law is a Chicago local organization. They focus on policies and laws that create and perpetuate poverty and racial inequity. And I think their opinion or their thoughts on this might be hugely valuable.
Yeah, that's a great point. They and I'm sure many of you know the Shriver Center. For those of you who don't, I worked with them extremely closely when I was in Springfield, and they have been very for quite a number of years now. They've been very deliberate about incorporating criminal justice questions and criminal justice reform into their anti-poverty work. Of course, with good reason. And so that's a great idea. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. It's really helpful. Thanks to both of you. That brings us to item 6 on our agenda, which is follow-up discussion on public input. I don't have big updates yet. I have mostly updates about the fact that updates will be coming, but I at least wanted to share this with the group, both because I committed to do certain things and also because they're interesting. First of all, following that discussion that we had about finding mechanisms of public input, Patrick Keenan-Devlin set up a conversation between myself and Pam Citronbaum from the Moran Center. Pam is, together with Nathan Norman from this committee, involved in a course during the summer of teaching methods of Kingian nonviolence to a group of Evanston youth, and she was very enthusiastic. And Nathan also is someone who's had a family emergency, so is not with us yet, but I'm sure if he's able to make it, I'm sure we'll be able to speak to this as well. Was really interested in continuing the training of those youth to create a mechanism for them to act as facilitators of community discussions around questions of public safety and reconciliation. And so she's in the process of putting together a plan for how we could do that, but I think it would be a really powerful way of having meaningful, structured discussions led by youth from our community. I think that's really something with a lot of promise to it. So more to come on that. Then additionally, one of the things that we were going to do coming out of last meeting was communicate with the Alliance for Safety and Justice. And I have a text from Evangeline, who unfortunately is ill today and could not join us today either. But she was able eventually to connect with the folks at ASJ, and they are interested in supporting our public engagement efforts and are also going to be sending us details shortly. So I have no definitive updates, but I just wanted to let you know that both of those things are in process, and frankly, demonstrating, I think, some real promise. And I'll be back with more on both of those before too long. Does anyone else have any updates that they want to share, or questions they want to ask, or suggestions they want to make regarding the effort to incorporate public input in our work?
Yes, since we are a committee of the city, so I'm not sure how that would work, but we could have meetings, community meetings, and throughout the city, throughout each ward, to do kind of like a round table discussion and everything. Those meetings we could have them to be open to the public and not.
Ms. Esther, I think you might have muted yourself.
I did. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. Go ahead.
I'll keep my hands down. That we don't have them, we have them around the city, and they be open to people. And then we would be getting people that would come from all different wards that would be attending most of these meetings, each meeting, to see what is being said and to share and to see if it's the same conversation or if it's a different conversation coming up. And that's something we had tried with the police department, with who was with Dr. Logan, but it didn't happen. So that, I wouldn't say it was a failure, because we learned what not to do the next time. So and in that, because people did raise questions, they did get answers, and they got more response and input in terms of the what are they called? The policeman that comes to the ward needed, what are they called? Problem solving people. Is that right, Melissa?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, and they would come, and they have been more involved, and the community has been engaging with them. They talk to them, they have their cards, and they call and ask questions. So it was, we didn't get what we wanted, but we did get in terms of people having access to what they felt was the police department, went through this officer that they could ask questions and get answers. So we're going to have to reach out to the people, and we have to do it in community setting, or find, like, we could, you find places to have them. In the 5th ward, you have the Levy Center. In the 7th ward, you have the town center. And then you have the Robert Crown for the people down on the southwest end. So you have to have it where the people are, because all of the people do not listen to it on Zoom, because they don't have the Zoom. There was a program that was sponsored by the North Shore Senior Center, and that's where they was trying to give the seniors a device that they could connect to on Zoom and be connected to meetings like this. It didn't go over that well, because the people say you put it on your TV and we could see what's in your house, and like, don't want that. So they did give out quite a few, but it didn't go wide enough to say we are connected to the whole of Evanston. That's like back in, which was, I have to look at it. There was some money that came into the city, that what was supposed to happen was that the funds was supposed to hook up most of the people to the internet that lived here on the west side of Evanston. That didn't happen. That funds got diverted, and it went to a program at the lake. So you will get some people coming up and saying to you, well, is this going to be like the time we were supposed to get the internet and then we didn't? And you'll be looking at, but there was money that came in. from Dan Shakowski brought it in, but somehow or another, why it was diverted to the lakefront program, we never did get an answer to that. But having these meetings, and they could be like on a regular basis or something, then you have people that comes out. They might come out, won't come to the Fifth Ward because they afraid. I don't want people to know what I'm saying here, but they'll go up to the Seventh Ward or the Third Ward, and they will talk about because they feel safe, because they feel their neighbors are the people that they would know that they came to these types of meetings. So we have to be the ones to start scheduling the meetings and having the meetings in public. Because doing it at 4:00, we missing a whole group of people. That is the parents of the kids that go to school, because they are working. So we can't, it's hard to plan a meeting to get all, but you kind of have to set them so that you know you will get most of the people. And when you do, you get input. The deployment meetings, there was quite a few, one while citizens would go to it and everything. They stopped because it didn't fit their schedule, and the people that was there, most of them was ones that was seniors. So we wasn't doing deployment meeting for young people. And we're the ones with the free, I don't have no free time, but they are the ones with free times. So if we want to deal with the issue of having public input and the community feel that they are giving input, then we might want to think about setting up meetings where the public could come to, and where we are there and they can talk and ask questions, and we will go back and forth with questions and stuff and answer and getting their ideas and things.
Thank
That's
you.
all. Now I'm going to test my mind.
Sarah.
Thank you, Mrs. Ester. I think that's very insightful. Kind of following the suggestions the last time we had this conversation, I had a chance to meet with all of Evanston Fight for Black Lives, and we were able to brainstorm as a group how we can continue this. And so we talked about the idea of sending out a survey to the communities most over policed. And so we know that our typical strategy is social media and things that require technology. And we are aware that that's not accessible to everybody. So we were thinking a flyer campaign where people have the option to fill out the survey in person of what they think policing should look like, what they would change, what their experience is, etc., or give them the option to fill out a Google form and list that on the sheet. And so that would be a simple drop the flyers in as many mailboxes as we can and hope that people respond. I don't know, I think that could be a start.
And just as a technical question, would your hope be to do that in partnership with this committee, or would you want it to be just EFBL's survey?
I think in partnership, I think in terms of what questions get asked we might need to have a meeting about that, but I think there would be, I think we had the idea of giving people the option to write what they believe policing should look like or their experiences, all those things I listed, but also then giving, because a lot of people aren't actually tuned in, and so then giving what our idea of policing looks like and what restorative justice practices would look like. So whether or not that would be the whole committee as it going out as a committee initiative or EFBL, the information would be shared with the committee and we'd be able to use it.
Great. Thank you. Do others have anything to add? Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks very much. And I agree. I think Ms. Ester's point is really important. You know, I think there's two parts to this. There's making sure that we are where people are, and there's making sure that we signal that we actually care about what they think, because showing up in a way that's convenient for someone to come give you their feedback still doesn't make it worth their while to do it unless they think you're going to care about what they say. And I think it's really important for us to demonstrate that level of interest as well as simply showing up. Alejandra.
Yeah, I was just gonna offer to Sarah and anyone else who's interested or in thinking about surveys or how to reach hard to reach folks. You know, the Equity and Empowerment Commission, which I co-chair, is also having conversations about how to engage, you know, folks most impacted by, you know, systems of oppression and violence. And so we are having conversations and just welcome folks who are interested to think outside of the box. I feel like Evanston is over-surveyed. And so we've got to figure out different ways. And I think to Miss Ester's point, we got to go to people. So happy to have an offline conversation with folks about that so we can put our brains together about how to connect with folks in different ways. And for one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how do we partner with organizations? I know I've been working a lot over the past year with Evanston Latinos. They've done a great job. They've got trusting relationships in community. And again, just back to the point about going to where people are, to be able to connect with them in a deeper way, especially if they've seen surveys all over the place. But again, just wanted to put it out there and make myself available to anyone who's interested in having that conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you. And then Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, it was just said. So I just want to like triple underscore going where people are at. You know, town hall meetings are nice, but that's an additional meeting you have to fit into your busy life. And so when people have already decided, you know, what events and meetings are important to them and what they have the time for, I think we need to respect that decision was made with a lot of thought and also with conversations with their household about what type of time they have and how they want to use it. And so I think going to places where people are at is really important. As an example, Family Focus, and Ms. Ester may have mentioned this, but Family Focus regularly through their programs meets with parents and the elders of those families in discussion. So that will be a great opportunity in the Fifth Ward to reach people. So just wanted to triple underscore going where people are already engaged in conversation and asking if they can set aside some time to hear from the committee, from this committee.
Great, thank you. Actually, if I could ask you to keep your camera on, council member, because I think we've got to go to our next agenda item, which is report outs from the working groups. And if you could go first, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, so we had a good discussion at our last meeting, and I think where we're at is we were creating just a few categories that we wanted to do some research into, and I think where we're at now is reimagining justice, where we're looking at decriminalization, diversion and deflection, so decriminalizing offenses. For example, drugs, diverting, looking at opportunities to divert arrests and deflection within the judicial system, reimagining policing or rethinking crime deterrence and emergency responses, reimagining leadership, training, and reimagining oversight and accountability. At our next meeting, Patrick Keenan Devlin was kind enough, he and his law clerk, to look into the question of what a peace officer is. So this authority, all in the state statute, all starts with this individual that we call a peace officer, which is any person who, by virtue of his or her office or public appointment, is vested by law with the primary duty to maintain public order or to make arrests for offenses, whether that duty extends to all offenses or is limited to specific offenses, and who is employed in such capacity by any county or municipality. And so that question of whether it extends to all offenses is the one that we're going to take up at our next meeting, along with hearing from Patrick and about kind of what are some of the roles and responsibilities and authority that a peace officer has. I think the question we're going to take up is, what offenses, what should be arrestable offenses here in the city of Evanston. And so we'll pick up with a conversation that Councilmember Reed is having about decriminalizing drugs. I think we'll hear from him about the conversations he's had with organizations that work in that space and go from there. So again, we'll be looking at the role of a peace officer in state statute, and then also looking at offenses that we would like to decriminalize here in the city of Evanston. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Councilmember Burns or any reaction to any of that? Okay, thank you. That's great. So next is Andy.
Hi, thanks everybody. And please, other working group members, please chime in if I mess something up or get it wrong. So, after our sort of report backs, our real core discussion centered on what we wanted this committee to do, which is of course the sort of violence prevention group. I think last time we reported back, our focus is going to continue to be sort of on the ground responses to violence prevention, and specifically sort of assaultive violence. We were kind of bracketing suicide, as a separate sort of thing, but acknowledging it's there. And also two other elements which we can continue to stress in our conversations. One, acknowledging the larger structural systemic issues, but really trying to get a handle on, the sort of on the ground responses. And two, making sure that our conversations will always incorporate victims and survivors and their own sort of networks as well. So that's sort of the key sort of themes that our group really values, that our group kind of continually centers on. So when we were in our discussions around what we want this committee to do, we actually I do think this relates to all the conversations we've been having, whether it's seeking input from community members, but large and generally, which is, we're gonna have to make some recommendations about what we want the city to do to support on the ground violence prevention efforts, period, full stop. And that's kind of what a lot of the conversations that we've been discussing and how this relates to things like funding and staffing and programs and initiatives. We're starting as a group and we'll probably continue to be reaching out to individuals, looking to populate and think about a fuller mapping of available assets and opportunities in the city around these issues. Again, right now we're just kind of gathering lists, and then we'll start to kind of bracket off and bucket and which ones deal with which things, and also which age groups and populations. We also continue to have conversations recognizing that resources available to young adults and kids are different than older individuals who may have their own children and families. So just trying to make some of those distinctions. We also talked, I can't give credit to the people that said it off the top of my head, but connecting the dots. One of the things we wanted to stress as we look at these different violence prevention efforts is to make sure we're not duplicating efforts and that things aren't purely happening in different silos, which often happens in this space. People are doing things that could be better handled by coming together. Also wanted to make specific and understand what sorts of specific recommendations would be best practice and informed from evidence in trauma responses, and what we also, someone had called the ripple effect. sort of how violence can ripple through neighborhoods and networks and families and communities in different ways, and what are the best practices to sort of to think about what recommendations we might make. Also, someone raised issues around reentry strategies and understanding what the levels are in Evanston, what the needs are in Evanston. This led to conversations around other dimensions broadly around public safety, the lack of an overnight drop-in center, the limitations that currently exist. And last but not least, the two other sorts of things that people discussed relative to those other points, we're thinking about how we integrate efforts around violence prevention with things like workforce development and other things that are happening in Evanston, including in the schools. And one of the themes that kind of came up, which I'll explain in the to-dos that you will hopefully hear from us in the coming months, was how does this relate to, we don't have a word for it or anything, but an actual office of public safety or an office of violence prevention, which can help coordinate those things, which would require and probably parts of conversations. And again, some of this language can be seen in the Evanston Fight for Black Lives document that was shared, which would require budgeting, staffing, professional staff, and giving people what they need to succeed in this space. And so that could be one potential thing to explore. Again, just early conversations that happen in these meetings. Briefly, our follow-up to-dos, which you'll see from this committee moving forward, is looking up and seeing sort of what information exists around offices of public safety or violence prevention. How do people do it? How do they do it well? How does it break down silos and coordinate? What does it entail? What would it need? Sort of doing some sort of a quick summary of that. There is going to be an effort by some of the committee members to summarize current outreach efforts in the city. What are their levels? Who's involved? What entities and organizations, both government and non-governmental, in Evanston exist? And last but not least, again, expanding examples of victim services programs operate currently in Evanston and Cook County. There are things that are available at the county level. There are things being funded by the state level. So those three sort of follow-ups, offices of public safety, current outreach efforts, and also looking at victim services are sort of tangible next steps as we continue the conversations about, you know, what are recommendations that fit Evanston and also sort of align with some of these best practice, national and local.
Terrific, thank you. Any questions for Andy or additions by others in the group? Or corrections by others in the group if needed? Great, thank you. So the last group is the one that I'm chairing, which is trying to wrestle our way through data regarding patrol and the specific kind of hour by hour and block by block allocation of the officer's time, together with this particular emphasis on traffic. So we had a brief amount of discussion about, you know, an ambition to really be bold regarding traffic enforcement, and you know, we're in the process just of gathering information about what has been tried elsewhere. But we spent essentially the entirety of our meeting being walked through by Sarah Jones from the police department, together with Commander Jason Garner from the police department, just being walked through 9 different potential reports they could send us. The idea was to give us a kind of a menu of options of what sort of data is out there. And so it was an incredibly interesting meeting to be in. It's brought on a very interesting meeting to hear summarized, because it was, you know, just a really kind of a study of a bunch of different spreadsheets and an effort to get us fluent with what kind of information is at the fingertips of the department and what kind of information is harder to get to. And you know, you have 2 different data systems, which means that there's sometimes questions that are either answered partially but in different respects by the 2, or can even fall through the cracks in between the 2. And so we're, you know, we're educating ourselves a lot about this with a tremendous amount of help and patience from the police department that's put up with my kind of nincompoop questions with equanimity. And I feel like we're really close to being able to make far-reaching requests of data that will put us in a position to do some real assessment analysis, while we're continuing to have the discussion about, you know, the connection between the core values that underlie this committee's work and our thoughts about how traffic enforcement could be best effectuated. So So, we are knee deep in spreadsheets, and we are, I think, beginning to see a path to the fog lifting so that we're able to really make the right requests to facilitate the work. But we're not quite there yet. So I would hope that in the next meeting or two, we'd be able to come back to you and say, here's exactly what we're asking for. Here's what we're going to learn from it. And let's think about what we might be prepared to do with that information. So that, does anyone have any questions for me? I know that was a kind of a meta description, but again, I think we're sort of in the midst of data analysis. But if anyone has any questions about that, let me know. All right, seeing none. I said I thought this might be a short meeting, even though the agenda was long on the page. It is 4:58, so I think that's a record for us, though, not by much. Thank you very much, everyone, for your engagement, your involvement, and your participation. And we'll be obviously having our working group meetings between now and our next meeting of this group itself, which will be 2 weeks from right now. So with that, thank you very, very much, and we'll see everybody soon.